Why do we suffer? It's a question as old as humanity itself, yet the pain of seemingly pointless suffering weighs heavily on many of us, especially when it touches our loved ones. Today, I'm joined with my friend Phil, who faced unimaginable challenges as his daughter battles with inoperable brain cancer. Join us as we explore not just the philosophy surrounding suffering and faith, but also the deeply personal journey of grappling with pain and trusting in God.
Phil, this is a pretty personal question for you.
hmm
Are you happy to chat about what brought you to this question of how do we deal with seemingly pointless suffering?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to chat with you, John, even though you're on the other side of the world. Our now 4-year-old daughter, at the time this all started, she was 2, has inoperable, incurable brain cancer. Absent of God doing a miracle or a very extreme medical breakthrough, she's going to have cancer the rest of her life. It was a long process even getting it diagnosed because where the tumor is in her brain, it presses up against the hypothalamus and other hormone production in her brain. And so that caused a condition that the technical term is diencephalic syndrome, or it's sometimes called Russell syndrome. It's rare. It's where you have a baby or a young child who, no matter what you do, you just can't seem to get them enough nourishment. And before it was diagnosed and understood properly, a lot of these children would just die of malnutrition because even though parents are like shoving food down their throat, they're just not getting enough calories. And we didn't understand that during the first year and a half, but we do understand now. It's because the hormone production is just going absolutely crazy. So their metabolic needs like skyrocket. And on top of that, because of the hormones are all out of whack, it usually causes a lot of vomiting. So for a while there, Eden was vomiting like 4-6 times a day, and she'd refuse to eat. I'd be shoving food down her throat because if I didn't, she wouldn't eat. And now I know probably the poor little kid's stomach just felt so horrible. I'm sure she was horrifically nauseous. And how can a 1-year-old express that?
Yeah.
And so we took her to all kinds of different therapies and things like that that doctors recommended. Eventually, she was hospitalized for being very, very malnourished because she was. And my wife is a doctor. She's an OBGYN. So she knows how the medical industry works. She knows how to talk to people. And I'm probably more familiar with it than most people are because my wife's a doctor and she talks to me about it, but still I'm not an expert or anything. My wife and I knew something is wrong. We didn't know it was cancer yet, but we knew something is wrong. And the medical team just they didn't really take us seriously. They were worried maybe we were abusing her or not feeding her enough. They didn't really believe me. And eventually they concluded, hey, the reason Eden has a problem is, Phil, you've given her a feeding aversion by forcing her to eat. And I was like, I will accept responsibility that perhaps I did so, but I only did so because she wasn't eating. There's still an underlying problem that I was trying to address. And so we left that feeling very discouraged because both my wife and I knew there's something else going on here that you have not found. And we didn't doubt that for a second. And so they put a feeding tube through her nose, and my wife and I would have to put that through all the time to like force high nutritious formula in her, which that did help offset the growth problems, but she was still vomiting all the time. And what 2-year-old wants a feeding tube pushed through their nose? Who can blame the kid for being really upset about that? I don't. And eventually we got a new pediatrician who looked at all that and said, oh, we should get her an MRI to check for a brain tumor because there's a rare condition that can be caused by a brain tumor that could lead to that. And at the time, we have a pretty good church support group, and they were meeting with us and praying with us, and they decided to hold the special prayer meeting before I took her in for the MRI. And a friend was like, hey, so should we pray that it is this because that'll get you answers, or should we pray that she doesn't have this? And I was like, no. Pray that she doesn't have this, because if she has this, it is bad. It's very bad. But then it turned out that that's what she did have, which gives us answers. But it's like, the answer is your then 4-year-old daughter has inoperable, incurable brain cancer. So that's what all this led about. And people were telling me, hey, Phil, you're a philosopher. You've got to have some thoughts about this. Write some stuff about it. And eventually I did. I wrote a few articles and then made some videos about them. But the term I came up with to describe this is what you said, seemingly pointless suffering. Because if you dig into philosophical literature, to say suffering is pointless, full stop, is actually a very strong statement that it's hard to justify. Because, what if the point of the suffering is something that I'm not in a good epistemic position to see? Like, what if the point of Eden's suffering is something that's going to happen 2 centuries from now? There's no way I could know that, but there's no way I can say it's not the case either. So I say, well, I'm going to call it seemingly pointless suffering because I mean, come on, girl with inoperable, incurable cancer. That's just wrong. And sure, maybe there's some overriding goods that could come from it that I'm not in a position to see, but I can't see them. And you can't either. And I don't think anybody else can, because that's just wrong. So I coined the term seemingly pointless suffering.
When we're thinking about suffering in the world, there's quite clearly suffering that's self-inflicted. Like if I speed and crash my car, I don't have anyone else to blame but myself. There's suffering that is quite clearly you can inflict on others. You also have this idea of like delayed gratification. I suffer now so that I can get a good in the future. Yep. But what do we do with this suffering? It doesn't fit into these easy categories. Like you've kind of created this category, seemingly pointless suffering. Okay, so now we've identified it, but what do we do with that? How do we as Christians sort of go about coming to terms with, this seemingly pointless suffering?
Okay. As I thought through all this, and I wrote a bit about this, there's a couple of things I think we should keep in mind. Oh, and actually just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I gave a whole course in my church about this. The first thing I think we need to do is understand there really isn't just one answer why. And that's a mistake a lot of people make is they're like, I want to know the singular answer to the problem of evil and suffering. And no, that's kind of a foolish way to go about it. Like you just said there, hey, there's some suffering that is my own fault. Yeah, if I smoke 10 cigars a day for 30 years and I get lung cancer, that's on me. And maybe that's a trade-off I'm willing to take, but that's on me. I don't think you can really chalk that one up to God being unfair. There's some suffering that seems to happen due to, for lack of a better term, randomness, and we're just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. You've got an old tree in front of your house, and the wind happens to blow a bad storm, it knocks it down on your house. Well, yeah, that's suffering, but come on, that's different than like my daughter having cancer. And if you think about other areas in your life, is it ever the case that you're like, I want to know the one answer why this happened? Well, no. That's ridiculous. There's usually lots of different reasons why things happen that almost all come together. And depending on what you're asking, you may be looking for a different answer. So no, looking for just one answer to the problem of evil and suffering, nah. That's like when physicists try to search for a theory of everything, one unified theory that explains everything. It's kind of a foolish idea. And with that, I also came up with a distinction, which I'm kind of surprised I haven't found other people really making, which is the how versus the why. And so I do like most theodicies that deal with the problem of evil and suffering. Like we could talk about skeptical theism, the free will defense, soul-making theodicy. I like those. But those tend to tell you how, not why. And what you really, really want to know is why. Like, I use this example all the time, but I pick up my cup of coffee to take a drink. Why is it's 8:30 in the morning here, and I just got done dropping off my kids. I always have coffee in the morning. This is my second cup because this is my normal routine. I like having coffee. How is my brain sent signals to my arm and my muscles contracted? We could drill it all the way down to individual chemical reactions in the cells, maybe even go down to subatomic particles if we really, really wanted to get intense. But that's the how-why distinction. And theodicies tend to tell you how, not why. But what you really, really want to know, at least most of the time, is why. I want to know that the suffering that's happening to Eden and my family isn't pointless. I want to know that God has a purpose. I want to know it's not that we're in an unfeeling, uncaring universe and we're just victims of forces well beyond our control. Now, at the same time, I'll tell you, knowing how is not useless. Like, going back to my example, suppose I go to pick up my cup of coffee and my arm doesn't work. Well, knowing how those processes happen could enable me to figure out, do I need some medical attention? Was I sitting on my arm the wrong way so it fell asleep? And if I need medical attention, the how processes could enable the doctors to be like, well, somehow you broke your arm and didn't realize. Or you've got one of those mental conditions where your body doesn't do what it wants to do, and let's put you on some medication to offset that. So it's not that there's no value in understanding how. There is a lot of value in that. But usually when we're actually going through suffering, especially bad suffering, we want to know why. And the reason why the seemingly pointless suffering is worse is, like your example of speeding or mine of smoking cigars, the why of that suffering is immediately obvious. I get cancer from smoking a bunch of cigars. Nobody needs to explain why that happened to me. It's perfectly the how and the why are perfectly obvious. 2-year-old, 4-year-old girl with cancer. No, the why is not so strictly obvious. The medical people can tell me some element of how and maybe what we can do to mitigate it, to manage it, to keep Eden alive as long as possible. But they can't tell me why this would happen. Is that speaking to your question?
I'm thinking of, in particular, the book of Job in the Old Testament. Job never really hears why.
Yeah,
right? God
exactly.
actually never tells him why. So there is a little bit of a gap, say, in our Old and New Testaments. We're never told why, but the story we are told is God doesn't avoid suffering, but God comes and participates in our suffering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Jesus, this heavenly divine being comes and takes on flesh and experiences what it's like to be a human. And, even to the point of death on a cross, he's crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of people ask, well, is this a breakup of the Trinity?
Yeah.
But the flip side of it is actually Jesus is going through some sort of seemingly pointless suffering there. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we know he does suffer for a reason. In that moment, do you think that's an example of seemingly pointless suffering, or someone feeling like they're going through some form of seemingly pointless
Yes.
suffering?
Yes. I didn't mention this in what I wrote, but Eleanor Stump in her
Mm.
book on the atonement has like a
Yeah.
nice theory on that where she says, hey, when you go through really, really intense suffering, like you're in so
Mm.
much pain you can't even comprehend it, it
Mm.
wrecks your perceptions to the point where you can't even perceive what's going on around you correctly. And she gives some
Yeah.
examples in literature and stories, but that's absolutely true. Like there are times I get migraine headaches periodically, and fortunately with my wife being a doctor, she said, oh, you do this, practice this, and they're not as bad as they used to be. But there were times when they were really, really bad. And even then, it's not like the pain is so intense I can't understand what's going on. But it ruined my perceptions to where I wouldn't remember things as well. I wouldn't see things as well. And it's people who've gone through really, really intense pain describe that, where they're like, I kind of knew my family was in the room, but I also didn't. And, weird things like that. And so her theory on that is that at that moment on the cross, Christ is not only, in great physical agony, because that if that's not the worst kind of torture a human being could endure, it's definitely very, very close.
Yeah,
He's
it's soul
also
crushing. Yeah.
taking on the sin of the world and all the sin, all the suffering that all human beings have endured. My word. How the mental and emotional anguish of that has got to be so exhausting and so horrific. I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. And so her theory is Christ is at that point so overwhelmed by all this that even though he and the Father are not separated, that's not how the Trinity works. He really can't correctly perceive things at that time, and tying it back, of course, that's only possible if he was not incarnated, if he was still fully God and not also fully human. His perception couldn't be off, but he's also fully human, at least at that point, due to the incarnation. So his perception can be skewed because a human being's perception can be skewed, especially by something like that. And I like that theory works. At least it seems coherent, makes sense of the data to me. And it also makes what Christ endured for us that much more poignant, that he had to have known that something like that was going to happen before going through with it, and he did it anyway.
Christ's relationship to the Father isn't built on his emotions, so he can feel an emotion of forsakenness, but that doesn't actually rupture the Trinity.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean then for the why? That God's answer isn't necessarily to give us the detailed why, but there is this answer, which is God comes and participates in humanity. He experiences the fullest breadth of suffering. Does this help us
I
sort
think
of grapple with seemingly pointless suffering?
I think so, because it shows us that whatever else is going on, we can't say that God doesn't care, because someone who doesn't care isn't going to go through that with you. We also can't say that he doesn't understand, because I think we have good cause to say Christ went through far worse suffering than you, I, or anyone else ever has. Now, maybe if you search all of history, you could find somebody who went through worse physical torture than he did. But that's not you, and that's not me, and that's not anyone I've ever talked to. If I talk to that person, maybe we have to have a different conversation. But yeah, so that tells us that. And then, like you said about Job, reading that, this had never occurred to me until I started reading and researching this. But you're right, God doesn't actually tell Job why. And Job's questions, to me as a philosopher, they're good questions, because by all accounts, what happens to him is unjust, and he's like saying, "No, this is unjust. I know you're God. You owe me an explanation why, because I don't deserve this." And he's right. He doesn't deserve this. Now, we as the reader are told the cosmic reasons why, because that's how the book starts. But as you said, Job is not. God doesn't come to him and say, well, Satan challenged my authority and I had to prove that he was wrong. God just says to Job, look, who are you to understand these things? Surely you were there when I laid the
Yeah.
Read God's maybe rebuke of Job there to be a little bit sarcastic if you wanted to, because he's asking rhetorical questions where the answer is clearly, no, God, I don't know anything about these things. I'd characterize it as almost a skeptical theism answer where God's saying, you're not in a position to know these things. Come on, man.
Yeah.
I am. Given what Christ went through on the cross, the fact that God is willing to endure this suffering, then he essentially comes to us and says, I know this seems pointless, using my own life as an example. I know it seems pointless that your daughter has inoperable, incurable cancer. I know this seems unjust, but you have to trust me. I know what I am doing, and I have to decide, am I going to trust God or not? Now, I've had enough experiences with God in my life beforehand that yeah, I think I can trust him. And I also think that given what Christ went through, we've got evidence to be like, yeah, he really does understand. He really does get it. So I can trust him when he says, yeah, I know this is hard, but you need to trust me. And I could give you other stories in my life. I think I was a year or two out of college, and I was dealing with some stuff in my life I didn't really like. And I remember lying on the bed in my apartment praying about it. And God said to me, look, Phil, look. When this happened earlier in your life, you didn't get it. Did I know what I was doing? Well, yeah. And then when this happened, you didn't get it. Did I know what I was doing? Well, yeah. And then when this happened, you didn't get it. Did I know what I was doing? Well, yeah. Then you need to trust me. I've got this. And I was like, okay, God, very good point. I will. That inspires you, because when you have moments of despair, because if you're going through this, you absolutely will. And anybody who tells you, no, don't despair, that's weak, those are not people you should listen to. You go through seemingly pointless suffering, you're going to struggle with feeling hopelessness and despair, because we're all human beings, and it's ridiculous to deny that. So find yourself something that is good, well-grounded, philosophically, biblically, art, that inspires you to look at it and go, maybe I can't do this for the rest of my life, but I can go one more day. And then the next day do it again and again and again. I've also found that it's good to cultivate disciplines in your life, both spiritual and other, that help cultivate virtue. Like, I made the joke to my church group one time, probably 6 months or a year after this started. I was like, yeah, it would be really, really nice in the midst of this to have some bad habits to fall back on. But for whatever reason, God spent the last 5 or 6 years weeding a lot of those out of my life. Come on. And yeah, I'm joking, but the point is, I'm glad that happened, because if I'd had those bad habits and hadn't been as disciplined, it would be harder to keep going. The analogy is, if the more you work out, the stronger your muscles get. Well, that translates spiritually and emotionally and mentally as well. The more high-level hard stuff you read, the easier it is, the better you sharpen your intellect. The more you pursue spiritual disciplines and virtue, the easier it is. Emotionally speaking, the more you deal with and actually face head-on emotional struggles and challenges, the stronger your emotions get, and the less likely you are to fly off the handle in a rage or burst into tears when somebody says something mean to you. Children do that, but as adults, you shouldn't do that. So that's the best advice I would give to people is try doing those things. Discipline yourself, find some good art, and also surround yourself with people who do care about you. And also, a good friend of mine who's actually also from Australia, although he lives in the States now, he's older than I am, and his adult son died, which is, no person should outlive their children. That's wrong. And I asked him one time how he was doing, and he said something along the lines of, I know people care, but they worry they're going to say the wrong things, so they don't say anything. And he was basically trying to say, I don't like that, but I'm going to forgive them anyway. And I was like, wow, that's very, very wise of you. So, but flipping that, I would be like, you're going through that. Surround yourself with people who care about you, and give them a little bit of grace if they say the wrong thing, but they actually are trying to help you. And if you know somebody who's going through that, I would say don't worry so much about saying the wrong thing, unless you're doing something really stupid, like saying, oh, I know why this is all happening. For goodness sake, don't ever say that unless you've got a direct vision from God.
If
or
Jesus
angel,
has appeared to you directly, then you can say that. But don't be Job's friends.
No, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. So, but just kind of let people know, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you. Whatever I can do, those kind of things, because that helps a lot. And of course, pray like mad about it. You get mad, talk to God about it. The scriptures are full of lament where people are literally raging at God saying, this is unjust, why won't you do something? I think that's perfectly appropriate. There's a whole nother thing where my wife has chronic medical issues, and one time when she was in the hospital, I was fasting and praying for her, and I literally told God, I will not stop fasting until one of 3 things happens. She dies, I die, or you come to me directly and tell me you have got to stop. And I kept doing that until she got out of the hospital, and I was a little worried maybe I'm pushing this too far, but I was like, no, looking back now, I think, no, that was probably the right way to do. That's in keeping with some of the
You think
Psalms of
about what
Lament and
some of
things like
those
that. So,
Psalms of Lament or Lamentations are going through. You know, Lamentations is basically at the site of a genocide, grappling with the destruction of Jerusalem and the decimation of a whole people group. You know, there's even just some of the verbs of what the author of Lamentations says. God, you have done this. You have beaten us. You have tore us down. You have very forthright speech. God doesn't really hold back anything. So yeah, there's definitely like good biblical precedents for speaking plainly to God and frankly to God, and yeah, not pulling your punches with God. God can take your punches. Yeah, he can take your anger or your questions. One final question about if
yeah,
you see someone in your life going through this sort of seemingly pointless suffering, what is some advice that you have? You mentioned a little bit there about, don't be quiet, don't avoid them. Is there any other sort of advice you would give here?
I think it's perfectly appropriate to ask
Mm,
them if they want to talk about it. And if they don't, don't. But, if they do, by all
mm,
means. And you're probably going to stumble around a little bit and say
yeah.
the wrong thing because these things are difficult. As long as you don't go too far and you're demonstrating that you really care about them, that's fine. Like nobody who's come to me and said, "Hey, Phil, can I talk to you about this?" have I been really
Yeah.
offended by. Now, there have been some people who've come to me and said, "Oh, Phil, you need to do X,
Oh,
Y, and Z." I
really?
know. And yeah, I'll give them grace, but that's more like, no, come on,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're talking about, man. Or like
Mm,
going back to Job, it says there, Job's friends sat with him and didn't say
yeah.
anything for 3 days. They only got in trouble when they opened their mouths and
Yeah.
started talking. And I don't think you should take from this, don't talk at all. I think the
Mm,
takeaway from that, the point is they were letting him know, we are here with you and we will bear this with
yeah.
you in as much as we can. And you can do that with words. And I think that's the good message. Like find, if you got a good friend and you know who's going through this and you can see some practical ways to like take
Mm,
the burden off them, so to speak, like here's some stuff I can do for you, do that. And also make sure it's going to actually help them. Like we've had
mm,
some people try to help us in ways that they perceive as
yeah.
helping, but actually just make more work for me. And I kind of roll my eyes because I'm like, I know they mean well. I know they're trying to help, but you just cost me 4 hours in a day when I didn't have 4 hours because now I had to do all these other
Yeah.
things because you helped me. And I don't say that to be mean to those people. They're
Yeah.
trying to let us know we're here to
Yeah.
help you. So yeah, that would be my advice is you see a friend or someone you know, a family member who's going through this, try to go out of your way to make it plain. I am here with you and I will
Mm,
bear this with you in as much as I possibly can, and I'll help you through it as much as I
yeah.
possibly can. And maybe that just means you give them a phone call and talk about what's going on. Maybe that means you show up at their house and just hang out with them for all day. Maybe that means you, I don't know, because practically speaking, like they've got to go be with their
Mm,
family at the hospital. So you show up and do their housework for a day or something like that.
yeah.
There's all kinds of things you could do because my wife and I, that's what we found has made us feel really loved with the people in our church group is they're constantly trying to do things to help us out and
Mm.
ask us how we're doing and
Well, does
letting
Paul
us know
say
they're praying for
bear
us and
one
things like
another's
that.
burdens? And that's what you're trying to get at there. Thanks for having this chat and for being so open about your life.
Absolutely,
I
man.
hope this blesses people on the internet.
Me too.